Let's get started with Cloud Functions. If you haven't initialized your functions yet, you can do so by calling Firebase init functions. We've done that in a previous video, so I'm not going to do it again. And what that command will do, it will generate this folder and install the package for you. So I'm just going to clean up in here, and we're going to set up our Firebase functions. So first we need to import the admin SDK. Firebase admin. And this will give you full access to the database or to your Firebase project. Now we can initialize the app with functions, and here we can, from this functions.config method, you can grab your Firebase API keys. So with that done, we can start creating our user function. I'm going to create a file over here called users. You can add folders and organize however you like, but we're not going to have that many functions in this course, so I'm just going to keep simple. So here's where I need to import functions and the admin. The admin, I'm going to use the Firestore, so I'm going to create a const that's going to hold that Firestore, just so we don't need to type this all the time. Here I'm going to create a function with export const. I'm just going to name it create user account. Now here I'm going to call functions, and there are a few ways you can trigger a function. If you take a look at the documentation, if you go to Cloud Functions, trigger background function, you have options to trigger when something happened on your Firestore, for example, on create a document, on update or delete. But here we're going to use an authentication trigger, which is going to trigger whenever a new user is created. So let's go back to our code, and here I'm going to call auth.user, and now we can call onCreate or onDelete. These are the two triggers there is for the authentication. So here, whenever the event happens, I'm just gonna make it short, I can do something with that event. Now first, let's console log the event. And this console log will appear for you on the, if you go to functions, you're only going to be able to see under the logs tab. And we're going to take a look on that after. Now we can build our user object, whatever is that we want to say to the database. Let's create the user object, and we're going to add the email, which is from the event email, display name, event display name, and so on. You can also get the phone number. It's gonna add a few more things which you're gonna need, and here you can also add, like for example, the role, and the role as we model here on our interface is an array of string. So I'm just gonna add member as a default for the role, and we can also set something like member scenes. So it's the event.metadata creation time. This was whenever the user got created on the Firebase authentication. I think that's good for now. Now we can just create a database reference and set and save this user to it. So user ref, and here's the DB doc, and I'm gonna add it as the users. collection, and here we can just pass the UID of that user. Now if you return, when you're dealing with functions, you always need to return, otherwise you're gonna get errors. userref.set. This is a method that you can use from Firebase. You have create, delete, get, and set is a method of the doc that you can just save it, and is destructive. So if you're using this somewhere else, which we will later, you need to pass a merge option to it, in case we are adding more information to this user. But here, because we are creating it for the first time, we don't have anything there, so it doesn't really matter. But just remember, the set method is destructive. It will remove anything that you have under this user's ID. Now our function is done. We create a user. We get that information from the authentication object, and use that to create our own user. And we are saving that here. Now let's go ahead and publish our function. I'm gonna open a new window over here. And to do that, you can just do Firebase. Before you publish, you should set which project you want to use. So if you remember, we have the Firebase RC over here, and we set the Firebase. You can either choose default, prod, or whichever. So Firebase use dev. Just make sure that that is done before uploading your function. So now here we can just do Firebase deploy. Because you just want to export that function, you can do only functions. And here, if you do only functions, it's gonna upload all functions in your source here. Or you can just call it one by one. For example, now we have this create users. You put a colon and the name of the function. But before we do that, we create our function, but we're not exporting. We are exporting in here, but we're not doing anything in the index. So whenever you try to do this upload, and you won't find this file, so we need to make sure that we go to our index and we're gonna export. You can either do one by one, or you can just export everything from the users. So this will pick up everything that's exported from this file. So here we got the create user. Later we're gonna have deactivate user account. So with this, you can just add one of these for any file that you create while exporting your functions from that file. So now if you run this code, it's gonna leave it without, because we're gonna have one function anyway. And I'm gonna deploy. So now before, while this is getting deployed, the Firebase instance that we're using right now, as of this recording, it's defaulting to Node version 6. Now we are in March 2019, and 1st of April of 2019, this will be defaulting to Node 8. So if you are watching this course now this month, you can go to package.json inside your functions, and here you can set the engine. I mean, it's always good to tell which engine you want to use. Later we can keep this one as well, but that will be the default afterwards. So if you want to use async await right now this month, you need to set the engine in there, and then that will change it for Node 8. Now another thing that you need to bear in mind is that Cloud Functions will default to US Central 1. But for me, that will not cut because I'm in Europe and I want my functions to be here So to set your functions, if you remember, we set on the Firebase, here we set to Europe West 1, passing to the configuration for this function. But this is the front end setup. We need to set up for our function. So here on the onCreate function, we can pass some more information. So before we set anything like auth or Firestore, we can do a few things. Set the region. So same, I'm gonna use Europe West 1. And you can also set the run with, and this you can set what kind of machine you want, how much memory, how long you want to keep it running before it stops, like the timeout. So here we pass an object, and the object, as you can see, the runtime options is timeout, memory, and the memories you have these blocks, 128, which is the minimum, and you can go up to 2 gigabytes if you're doing stuff like image processing and heavy stuff on your background. We don't need that kind of power because this is just a database, right? So we're gonna go with the minimum. So memory, and it's taking a string, so 128 is the minimum. And I'm also gonna pass the timeout seconds for a very short time, let's say 60 seconds. So there you go. By doing this, your function is gonna be created on this region, and it's gonna have this memory allocation and so on. Now, if you save it and let's redeploy. Now here on your console, you're gonna have your create user account function and the region and the runtime. And these were the defaults that was created for us. So let's go back and publish our function with these new settings. So I'm gonna do the same. Remember, we can just do a create user account here if you want to deploy only one function. And now that we have one function created with this name, it's gonna ask if you want to delete it, that function, and also because it's from a different region. All right, I made a mistake in there. Is West 1 without the dash. So I'm gonna do that again. Sorry about that. If you want to get the list of regions, we can find that on the functions. If you scroll down, functions location. And if you scroll all the way down, you should have a full list of regions. Now back in our code, as you can see, would you like to proceed with the deletion? And they're gonna list the functions that will be deleted. We're gonna say yes. All right, now that was done, as you can see, we have a deleted operation and a create. Now it's defaulting to node 8. Let's take a look at the, here's our default. If I reload, now we have Europe West 1, node 8, and with the memory allocation that we set. All right, now it's time to test. First, I'm gonna go to my authentications tab and I'm gonna delete this user. And I have my server running. So I'm just gonna authenticate again. First, I'm gonna clean up my storage cache. You can go application tab, clear site data. Now our user is new. I'm gonna log in with Google. Now my object is empty because there was nothing there. And here on the console, I have my new user. If I go to my database, my user should have been created here. So I have my member scenes, my mail, everything that I got it from the event. Now if I go to the functions tab, and here on logs, So now here's the log for the create user function. You can ignore this one. This was from that I did from before on this project. So here's gonna tell if you want to click here and view all execution, it's gonna display only that one. And here you have the ID for that function. So it started. Here's telling you that some of the quotas are limited. For example, if you want to use other Google APIs, you need to enable the billing first. But for our project, this is fine. This event with this little info icon, it's our console log here. So you can see the event in there, and this is what we're gonna get from this onCreate function, this event right here. And this is what we use to create our own user. Now the user finished with OK, so that's done. And on our database, we now have our user with the user ID. Here's gonna be all the IDs for the other users. Now we're gonna have one problem. If you remember, we set our database not to accept reads or writes for anyone. But we could write because we're using the admin SDK. But now, because we're trying to get this information from our front end, and we didn't set any rules allowing that, here in the rules, we see that read and write, if request auth is not null. So if you go to our application, we're gonna get this missing or insufficient permissions error. And this is just telling you, hey, you're not allowed to grab that information from us. Here on our application, on our service, this is what we're trying to grab from there, and we're not allowed. So on the next lesson, we're gonna learn how to allow reads and write to our database.